You've got Isaiah Pacheco getting hurt. You've got Cooper Kupp getting hurt. Tua obviously got hurt. A.J. Brown is out this week. T. Higgins, Kenneth Walker. A lot of our fantasy teams really need candidates that we can buy. And so you should be buying these players for your fantasy football team. And let's start with a guy that's not very popular right now in Chris Olave. He's not been very productive over the first couple weeks, and everybody knows it. Despite the Saints actually coming out and having 2 very productive games, coming out and destroying the Panthers, and then hanging a ton of points on the Dallas Cowboys. It's been one of the surprises of the NFL season so far.
Respect.
And when you're looking at Alve versus Rashid Shaheed, Shaheed has had a long touchdown in each of the first 2 games, and you've seen that kind of cut into Olave's production. And I think a lot of people are accrediting that, and maybe kind of a slow start, to why Alave hasn't really been productive. When you're looking at him over the first couple games, only 2 targets in week 1 for 2 receptions, and then 6 targets this last week for 4 receptions, 81 yards. He did have 12 points in full PPR leagues. But people are still very low on Alave because they spent a second-round pick to get him. And when you've got 12 and 3 points in your first 2 games, people are not going to be very happy. And when you're looking at Rashid Shaheed and his production, 16 points, 20 points, but he had a touchdown in each of those games. And you're talking about targets, 5 and 4 targets. So it's not like he's drastically out-targeting Rashid Shaheed. Here's what you need to know about Chris Olave and why he's a good buy for your fantasy team. New Orleans Saints have now been involved in 2 blowouts. Two games where when you see Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed only played 42 and 39 of the 59 total snaps that the New Orleans Saints had on offense. They only ran 16 and 17 routes in this game. Chris Olave getting 3 more targets than Rashid Shaheed on the same amount of routes run. Still, I mean, Chris Olave had 7 targets on 16 routes run. So when you're talking about, the percentage of available targets, Chris Olave is still raking in a lot of those. The problem is, A, Alvin Kamara had 4 touchdowns this week. B, they blew out the Cowboys. So they took him off the field in the second half. They weren't playing a ton of the second half. In the first half, obviously Shaheed was the one that got the touchdown, but Kamara was vulturing all of those touchdowns. He looked virtually unstoppable. And because of that,
he was also like 2 inches away from getting a touchdown.
Olave I know. Yeah. And so it's a completely different discussion if Olave has that touchdown. But you are going to have some people, whether it's half PPR, we had like 10 points, or full PPR, we had 12 points, who are very disappointed with this performance in Chris Olave so far this season. And I'm here to tell you, there are going to be more competitive games. Chris Olave is going to be running more routes than he has. He's still going to be getting a high percentage of the targets. He's still going to be more reliable than Rashid Shaheed. And I do think he is not only the New Orleans Saints fantasy wide receiver to own, but I think if you buy low on Chris Olave, and you're sending offers for him right now, again, buy low on Chris Olave. If somebody's not selling Chris Olave, you can't buy low. Or if somebody wants full price for Olave, you can't buy low, and that's a different story. But we're targeting him as a buy low, and if you can get him cheaper than what you were drafting him for, or cheaper than what the guys around him in the drafts were going, I think Chris Olave is a guy that you are going to see could be a league winner at the end of the year because of the upside he has and because that offense has honestly looked a lot better than we thought it would. And so Chris Olave, go get him. I think if you can buy low right now, it's a perfect opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and I also think that you should go and be getting Calvin Ridley. This is a guy that we've been very high on all offseason. We thought that he would start the season slow. He did week 1, thought he would have a rough week 2 as well against the Jets secondary, but he actually goes up and posts 25 points in a game where he was going up against Sauce Gardner, and he had 2 touchdowns. Now, every single week, are we expecting Calvin Ridley to post 2 touchdowns off of 4 receptions and get 20, 22, 25 points out of that, depending on what format you're in? No, I'm not expecting that from Calvin Ridley. What I am expecting is for his chemistry to continue to get better with Will Levis in a brand new offense against teams that are better matchups than Sauce Gardner and the Jets. If he's able to produce like this against better or easier defenses and easier matchups, like I'm totally for that. I am very optimistic that Calvin Ridley is going to be able to sustain this. Again, I'm not betting on him getting a carry for a touchdown and a reception for a touchdown every single week. I'm betting on the matchups being better. I'm betting on his ability to showcase his talent consistently because he just did against one of the best secondaries in the NFL. And I think you're going to continue to see Calvin Ridley be on the up. So look, this is a situation that is really, really polarizing because Will Levis looks awful and Brian Callahan knows it. I mean, he's cussing Will Levis out when he comes off the field like every other play. I'm exaggerating, but what the heck are you doing, man? I mean, yeah, that's what it feels like when you watch Will Levis. He makes some of the worst decisions has seemingly awful vision in the pocket and is bailing out of clean pocket. Like, he's not doing anything right. The one thing he did right was throw a prayer to Calvin Ridley because he trusted Ridley to get the ball and bring it down, and he did. So you're looking at the best assets in that offense being Tony Pollard and Calvin Ridley. I think at this point, DeAndre Hopkins is a shell of what he used to be, and we knew that coming into this season. Calvin Ridley is the number one option there. They are prioritizing getting the ball to him, and I think you're expecting more of that in weeks to come.
Let's talk about Jonathan Taylor. And I think there is some risk to buying Jonathan Taylor. But the one thing that we learned this week is that even when the Colts are absolute 100% certified hot garbage,
dog water,
Jonathan Taylor can still get 15 points. Because he didn't even have a touchdown today. He had a fumble, actually. Still had 15 points. He had 12 attempts for 103 yards. He averaged almost 9 yards a carry. Because it's Jonathan Taylor, right? And this is a Colts offense that does still have a serviceable offensive line. And so I think the run game is going to be fairly sustainable, especially with the threat that Anthony Richardson still is on the ground, even if he can't throw a football. And so with Jonathan Taylor, I think there is a little bit of risk here because when you're looking at his usage recently, he was not on the field as much as he was in week 1. He played 29 of 56 total snaps. He wasn't on the field for 2-minute drills. He wasn't really on the field for third downs. He got outsnapped by the other two guys, Sermon and Goodson there. And so that is a little bit concerning. However, I do think with the performance that the Indianapolis Colts put up today, I think you're going to see some things change there this week. I think you'll see Taylor back on the field for those important snaps. And with JT, again, this is a dude that when he scores touchdowns has 25-point upside. And unfortunately, that didn't come today. He had a touchdown in week 1. But had he had a touchdown today, you're talking about a 21 to 27-point game, depending on how many touchdowns he scores. And I think that is a realistic possibility given the fact that Anthony Richardson pretty much looks incompetent throwing the ball right now. They're going to lean very heavily on the run game. And while you could say, yeah, it's going to hurt Jonathan Taylor that they're not actually going to be passing the ball at an efficient level, I would agree with you. But the fact that they do have a dual threat quarterback will eliminate some of that concern because they are still going to have to respect Anthony Richardson. And I do think Jonathan Taylor proved today that he can still be productive in situations where the Colts offense as a whole looks like absolute dog crap. And so Jonathan Taylor, I feel like you can get him cheaper now because people are going to look at the Colts and associate bad, fantasy bad, really bad with the Colts. If you can't buy low on Jonathan Taylor, I wouldn't. I would only be buying Jonathan Taylor if somebody is selling him at a discount. And so this is send a feeler in your league and see what the JT owner thinks. If you can get him for any cheaper than what he was going, I would say probably 3rd, 4th round caliber guys you could get JT for. I'm still comfortable doing that because he is talented. He has a good offensive line, does have a dual threat quarterback, and I do think you see him on the field more for some of those passing downs than you saw this week. So Jonathan Taylor, again, go send some feelers and see what you can get if you need a running back in your league.
Last week, we put out a bat signal for the real JSN to stand up, and he actually did because our patience was running thin, and he finally had his breakout game, 16 targets against a really solid New England defense. When DK Metcalf got his own as well, 14 targets in that offense. DK ended up, again, having the upper hand from a production perspective. Not a surprise. He did have the touchdown. He has the big play, deep threat ability, but JSN is that possession wide receiver and demonstrated that consistently, finally, over the stretch of an entire game and just totally out-targeted Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett was the odd man out, the clear third option. 2 targets this week. I think you're seeing JSN finally on the up, building that chemistry with Geno Smith. Is Geno Smith every single week going to throw 44 targets? Or throw 44 passes? Probably not, but look, I think this is absolutely production that's sustainable for JSN. He was able to make a lot out of the opportunity that he got, which was also a lot. Again, 17.7 points in half PPR formats. This is a guy that did all of this production without a touchdown. So you tack on touchdowns, which are volatile. You give them to him or you take them away. This is a production you get when you take them away. You're looking at even more production when you give it to him, those touchdowns. So with JSN, look, this is another situation where you're going to see these targets. A lot of people in your league are going to see these targets, and they're either going to think that it's fool's gold, and they're going to try to ship them off, and that's when you can capitalize, or you're going to have people that I think are smarter and realize that this is legitimate because this is the talented JSN that we thought was there, and they're going to want to hold on to him, and they're going to price him accordingly. Don't go and overpay for people that already believe in JSN, but for those doubters, for those owners of JSN who want to get out now because they have cold feet about his outlook for the rest of the season, go and capitalize on that. I think this is a legit showcasing of what JSN could do for the rest of the season.
Real quick, do us a huge favor. Our data shows us that 75% or more of you are not subscribed. If you enjoy the content, you enjoy the production quality, you enjoy the research we put into it, make sure you drop a like and make sure you subscribe. We promise to bring you accurate, in-depth, and quality fantasy football analysis all season long, so we appreciate it if you do that for us, but let's get back to the video. Let's talk now about Brandon Aiyuk, and obviously a slow start for Brandon Aiyuk to start the year. 4.5 points, 5 points in week 1, and then 8 points in week 2. It's not great, right? He's gotten 5 targets in each of these games. He's only caught 6 passes this year, and he only has about 65 yards. So what's the deal with Brandon Aiyuk? There's a couple things at play here. Number one, I do think that the San Francisco 49ers offense looks a little bit more limited without Christian McCaffrey, which that should come as a surprise to no one. That's not a hot take. Yeah. Christian McCaffrey is one of the best players in the NFL. And so when you lose a player of that caliber, naturally that type of offense is going to be a little bit less dynamic. I think you're seeing that play out not only, with Jordan Mason, who is, good, but not Christian McCaffrey level, but in the passing game as well. And I think with Aiyuk in particular, there are a couple other factors here that have allowed him to not be productive. Number one, he didn't practice in training camp at all because of the contract situation. And I do think that does matter. I think you're going to have him be a little bit rusty at the beginning of the season. It's been a while since he's actually played this type of football, right? It's been a while. And so I think as he goes throughout the year, you're going to see Brandon Aiyuk become more productive. I think also you're already seeing him kind of trend up. The Jets matchup in week 1 was bad. The Minnesota matchup was, not bad, but not great. You do have the Rams, the Patriots, the Cardinals, the Seahawks, the Chiefs, the Cowboys. So some tough matchups in there. But really, when you're looking at the end of the year, Arizona, Detroit, Miami, the Rams, Chicago, Buffalo, Green Bay, Seattle, there are some very productive games in there, I think, for Brandon Aiyuk. I think there's some potential for him to be productive more towards the end of the year. And the other thing is with Brandon Aiyuk, it's not like we didn't know that he was capable of putting up 5-point games. Last year he had games of 7, 9, 6, and 5 in games where he wasn't really getting touchdowns or wasn't getting targeted at a high enough rate to where receptions were essentially boosting his production. So with Aiyuk, I am confident in the offense. I am confident that he's going to continue to get less rusty as the season goes on. I am confident that Purdy is going to make it more of an emphasis to target him. I am confident that there's a chance that the other 49ers miss time. Brandon Aiyuk has, if anything, the one thing he's been really consistently good at is he's staying on the field. And so with Brandon Aiyuk, I think he is a guy that I'm targeting in my fantasy football leagues right now because I think the upside is going to outweigh the price. I think people are going to be severely lower on him after this week. Go trade for Brandon Aiyuk. Go try to buy low on him. At least send a feel out and see what people would trade him for in your league. But he's a guy that I think still has a lot of upside. A lot of people are going to be looking to sell.
Yeah, Rachaad White's another guy that I think a lot of people are panicking on right now because of multiple reasons. I think the number one reason being you look at a box score and you see Bucky Irving getting 7 carries, Rachaad White getting 10. What I think a lot of people don't know is that Rachaad White did leave that game. He was banged up. He ended up coming back, but again, he didn't get a ton of usage after that because they started moving away from the run game. That game was super chaotic against Detroit in week 2. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on there. Baker had 18 points only on 19 passing attempts. It's crazy. But look, at the end of the day, Rachaad White is still the running back to own in that offense and can still be productive. You saw it in week 1. He did not score a touchdown. He still had 15 carries, 6 targets, 6 receptions for 75 yards. Very inefficient on the ground. That's what you're going to get from Rachaad White. Not a ton of efficiency on the ground, but you are going to get opportunity in the red zone in normal games. I would not classify the Detroit game as a normal game, and you're going to see that receiving usage come as well. So I really am looking at week 2 as kind of a fluky week. And I think you're going to have a lot of people that are panicking about Rachaad White when they look at that box score, when they see Bucky Irving breathing down his neck, when I just don't really think that that's the case. I think Rachaad White is a guy that you really want to get at a discount at the moment, and you're going to like it in the future. It's not pretty because it's not the prettiest offense, but it's something that's definitely going to pay off.
Let's talk about Kyler, because if you need a QB on your team, I think Kyler's going to be a hot topic after this week. He had 15 points in week 1, but he had 28 points this week. And a lot of that came because there wasn't really a difference in rushing production this week, right? 5 carries for 57 yards in the first game, 5 carries for 59 yards in the second game. It's essentially identical. And so where was the production difference for Kyler Murray this week? It was in the passing game, right? He actually had less completions this week, but he had 3 touchdowns. And I think with the Arizona Cardinals offense, I think there's serious potential for passing touchdowns to actually be a normal thing for Kyler Murray. And when Kyler's been healthy, I mean, when you're looking back at his good years like 2022, he had games where he had 3 touchdowns. He had lots of games where he had 2 touchdowns when he was healthy. In 2021, when he had his best season, 4 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns. And this is
MVP candidate year.
Exactly. And also he's playing with D-Hop that year, right? He's playing with his best receivers when he had a dominant receiver. Sound familiar? I mean, he's got one now. And so if you can get Kyler, because this is one where we're telling you to buy after he really did just go off, because you haven't even seen the rushing upside yet. If Kyler scores a rushing touchdown in this game, you're talking about 34 points. And I think this could be a weekly occurrence. He only had 266 passing yards. They only passed the ball 21 times. They only needed to pass the ball 21 times.
I think there's a lot of people that still don't believe in the Arizona Cardinals offense. I think it's as simple as that, and a lot of people are low on Kyler.
I believe. I believe. I'm like the kid in Polar Express. I believe now. But I will say this. Kyler looks like Kyler again. If you watch these games, you can see the escapability of Kyler.
And he looked like Kyler at the end of last year.
He's a magician.
People just ignored it.
He's a magician, dude. He is Houdini. He moves and extends plays like nobody have ever freaking seen. And because he can extend plays like that, and because he has a really good arm, Kyler Murray's a good passer, guys. And I think people look at Kyler Murray as a rushing upside quarterback. He can't really pass the ball. But in reality, I think we saw this week, and I think what we should know going forward is that Kyler Murray is capable of passing the ball. And so when you have somebody that is that good with that set of weapons, Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, Michael Wilson's not a pushover. Dortch is solid for a slot wide receiver. That quarterback with that set of weapons, I think, can not only be productive from a rushing upside standpoint, which you haven't really seen untapped yet, but I think he could be productive from a passing game standpoint. And so for Kyler, if you drafted him where we were drafting him, you feel really good about it. You probably have to pay a little bit more now. I totally understand that. Do we still think it's worth it? Yes, we do. We do think it's worth it. Yeah. I think Kyler could be that good. And again, you're targeting him for week 16 when he plays the Carolina Panthers. And potentially a situation where they could actually end up being fringe playoff, in my opinion.
Right.
I think they could.
Yeah.
Sorry if you think that's an overreaction. I don't. I think their offense is good.
Yep.
The Rams, we just saw that, right? So the Patriots and the Seattle Seahawks. And so I think there's a ton of potential for Kyler at the end of the season. Yes, I'll pay a little bit more than what he was being drafted for because I know that if I need a quarterback, he's a really good solution at quarterback, and he looks like his old self. I'm buying Kyler Murray.
This is another ugly one. And I know it's Travis Kelce, a big name. He's had really, really slow start to this season. 5 points in week 1, 1 point in week 2, only 1 catch against Cincinnati. But when you're looking at the start of the season, I mean, they're starting their year with Baltimore and Cincinnati, 2 of their biggest rivals. And not only 2 of their biggest rivals, but 2 of their biggest rivals that have been burned by Travis Kelce specifically. So all eyes remain on Travis Kelce as really one of their top weapons there. And yes, Rashee Rice is that guy. He is going to be really ultimately the top weapon for Patrick Mahomes, I think, from here on out, barring injury. But with Travis Kelce, it gets easier from here on out. They've got Atlanta next week. They've got the Chargers, who he has the Chargers number and has had the Chargers number for years. They've got New Orleans, and then San Fran, Vegas, Denver. They also have Carolina in week 12. When you're looking down the line, they've got some tougher matchups towards the end of the season. But to me, this is something where I think you're expecting Travis Kelce to definitely be better than he has been in the first 2 weeks of the year, where they're still trying to figure things out, where he really has played a decoy role and allowed other players in that offense to be more productive. So with Kelce, look, I am betting on Travis Kelce, the future Hall of Famer, to look like 80% of what he used to look like. I don't think that's asking too much because, yes, he's 34 years old. Yes, he's aging. Yes, his best years, his best productive seasons are behind him, but he still has Travis. He still has Travis Kelce. He still has himself. He still has Patrick Mahomes throwing him the ball. And he still has the most established chemistry with Patrick Mahomes down the line. And I think that's really going to matter when you start getting into these weeks deep into the season, when you start really depending on the guys you trust the most. And Travis Kelce still is that guy.
So those should be some solid buy targets. And again, we're not really shooting for hey, buy this guy so he can sit on your bench. When we're talking about buys, these are guys you're starting. These are studs.
Yep.
These are guys that could win you fantasy football leagues, and you have to be aggressive. And a lot of times with the injuries that are piling up in the NFL, that's what it takes to win a fantasy league. And so be aggressive, take some shots on these guys, send out feeler offers, and see who's selling low on some of these dudes. But do us a huge favor, make sure you drop a like and make sure you subscribe if you play fantasy football. Really appreciate it. If you do that, it supports the channel, and it shows that you enjoy the content that's coming out, and we can produce more of it that way because it supports us. So we appreciate it if you do those two things. But we appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you later.